Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelly Gaynor. I am the advisory board chair for the Sex Ed Lecture Series, and we're here today to talk about our new certificate program, all about consent and sex ed. I'm joined today by the instructor for the course, Isy Abraham-Raveson. Hi, Izzy. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself for folks who aren't already familiar with you, your background, how you got into sex ed, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So, as you just heard, my name is Izzy. I like they pronouns best, and I'm the executive director of Yes, Your Empowered Sexuality. Yes is a Philly-based nonprofit that provides anti-oppressive, consent-based, and pleasure-centered sexuality education to people of all ages. And we really do mean of all ages. I have an early childhood education background as a preschool teacher for several years. And so we work with kids as young as preschool and people as old as elders, grandparents. How I got into sex ed was in my undergrad education. I have a gender and sexuality studies degree from college, and I wrote my thesis about sex ed and shame and silence within sex ed. And one of the pieces that I identified key silences around three topics that were causing shame for young people in their early sexual experiences. And one of them was silence around consent. So that led me to my first sex ed internship at the Masakane Center in New Jersey, and then to get my master's in sex ed from Widener. And here we are. I've been doing it for a while now. Yeah, I think that's me. Love to talk about consent.
Well, and that leads right into the next question, which is what made you want to teach this course? So I think we've already heard
Yeah.
a little bit, but tell us some more.
Yeah, I am so interested in getting deeper into consent than is I'm so pleased. Let me start with this. I'm really pleased and grateful that there is a cultural discourse around consent now to begin with. That's wonderful. And I'm excited about the next step and getting a little bit deeper. I think, consent is sexy, for example, is like that's awesome if that works for people. And also, it's limited, right? Or like the consent education that we get in college orientation programs for first years, that's often the first consent education people get. It's often a little bit fear based. It often has these statistics of like this many of you, this is going to happen to. And also, it's often very bystander intervention oriented, which is awesome to be a good bystander, but it's also sort of like, and it's on you to stop these people. Like, basically, the rapists are going to rape, but it's on you to try to like get in there and interrupt it, right? Which is a pretty wild way of introducing consent to a community. And so I'm just really interested in thinking more broadly to body autonomy and not just thinking about consent with sex and not just thinking about it as like a legalistic exchange or a way to get out of trouble, but actually thinking about how we take care of each other, how we own our own body autonomy, how we respect others' body autonomy from birth, right? From birth to death, sex or not. So, yeah, I get really excited about that. And I get to talk in my job to, as I said, preschoolers about consent and being in charge of their own body, to parents about how to talk to kids about consent, to teachers about how to build a consent based classroom, to doctors about how to build a consent based healthcare practice. So, I'm really excited to bring all of that to the course.
That really resonates with me, particularly what you said about, consent and like it not being about here's how not to get in trouble or like it's legal based. And when I was teaching in schools, that was often the bottom line. People just wanted to know, okay, how will I not go to jail? And that's really sad, right? If that's your baseline, right? And instead of thinking about how can we not, instead think about how can we be a good human. So I'm excited for your course and to figure out some more ways to do that. So how is the course going to be structured? How will you be delivering it?
So the course will be delivered virtually, and for each class, there are a few different lectures, recorded lectures, or other materials that people will watch or read in advance. So 12 hours of synchronous content, 12 hours of asynchronous content, and then we'll get to talk about these lectures and readings in class. Each week has a theme, so they're organized around different topics, and we'll get to talk about those topics. Some of those topics are consent and younger students, consent and race, consent and queerness, consent and risk. So those are some examples of some of the topics we'll get into.
I love that. I think folks might not folks in our field, but folks might think, okay, consent, right? That's one class and we'll cover everything. And I love seeing the intersectionality of those different topics. So, how did you choose the webinars that you're going to use for, the pre-recorded content?
Yeah, so the sex ed lecture series had a certain amount about consent, and so they shared those with me. I went through them and picked ones that felt aligned, and then also found some outside sources that I thought brought in some important other voices. So I know one that I brought in that wasn't already in there was a lecture from Dorothy Roberts about liberating sexuality and thinking about Black women and consent. And that was just something that I thought we really needed to hear. And we have a few zines and articles to fill other little gaps.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So, for folks considering taking the course, how strict is it going to be in, attending every lecture and, or every session and doing all your homework and everything? Like, what can folks expect?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it will be strict in that it's not like it's about you and your experience, right? Like there is an expectation that people will attend at least all the sessions they can. If they have to miss one or two for an emergency, obviously we're all humans. We expect people to read the content just because that's what makes it a good class discussion, right? Like if nobody prepares, then we don't have much to talk about. But it's not going to be graded. It's not about that. It's simply about hopefully engaging as much as we can so that we can have a great group experience.
Along those lines, for folks considering the course, would you say it's good for beginners or good for more advanced learners, or do you think there's something for everyone?
I'm definitely hoping there will be something for everyone. It is going to be a deep dive, and I am hoping we can have a conversation about consent beyond sort of the 101. So if you've never heard of consent before, you'll be diving right in, but I think there will be something for everyone.
So I think some of the topics that you're going to discuss are probably pretty heavy. How do you support a learning environment that's challenging but also affirming and, safe for folks?
Yeah, so we definitely want to always make sure that we're creating a container, that we're creating as safe a space as possible. But also, I really trust learners to take care of their own needs as needed. And we will be on Zoom, so people will be in their own homes. So people can certainly turn off their cameras, walk away, get water, lie on the floor, pace, take a break whenever they need to. And so that's something that we'll establish right up front. It's just, meet your body's needs, meet your nervous system's needs, meet your emotional needs, however you need to. If you want to ask for support, we are available for that. I will say that this does bring up heavy topics, but I think people hear consent and go right to sexual violence. That is not my approach to talking about consent. I think we have to have a pleasure-centered way of talking about consent, of how good things can be. And so there will not be a heavy focus on sexual violence, although some of the lectures that people will be watching from other educators definitely do talk about that. But again, people will be watching those on their own, and so can skip, can turn it off, can regulate how they need, and I will be available for support if anyone needs it.
I think, sometimes folks have negative feelings about being virtual, but there really are a lot of advantages to it. And I think you're kind of speaking to that a little bit, is that if a topic is heavy, you're already hopefully at home or somewhere that you feel safe. You have the advantage of being able to hit pause, which in person you can't usually do. So yeah, that's great. So I don't want to embarrass you too much, but I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about your book about consent, which I actually have right here because
Oh,
I bought it for my son many years ago after seeing you talk actually a long time ago. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, kind of what the themes are in there and how that came to be.
absolutely. Thank you for asking. Yes, so I am the author of The Great Big Hug, illustrated by my friend Todd Hall. It's a children's book about consent. It's about an elephant and a meerkat who are very good friends. An elephant consistently disregards their friend's needs and boundaries and thinks, oh no, nobody likes me. No one wants to be my friend. And then ultimately has to realize actually they've just been disrespecting their friends. And maybe if they listened a little bit better, they would know how to respect boundaries, and then their friends would want to play with them. So those are the themes, and the idea from that for that book really came out of the fact that I felt like there were a lot of consent, not even a lot, but there were emerging some consent children's books that had the message of, you're in charge of your own body, you're allowed to say no, things like that. But not a lot of children's books that were addressing what about the potential perpetrator, right? Like what about kids who are crossing other people's boundaries, which by the way, all kids do, all humans do, all adults do. We all cross people's boundaries, even if we're not perpetrating serious violence. We all cross boundaries and have to take accountability. And so allowing kids to see themselves in the character who's actually crossing the boundaries and needing to grow and learn and take real accountability was really important to me. And so that's how that book came to me.
I think that's so important, and it makes me think about refusal skills activities that we see in a lot of curricula, and they're always focused on the person saying no, and they're never focused on the other person. And obviously, there's a there's a lot there to unpack, right? But one of the things is like learning how to hear no
Yes.
is that's hard. It's hard being rejected. It's not an easy thing, and I think sometimes we jump so quickly to rape is bad, crossing boundaries are bad, and like, of course, those are bad. And sometimes people just don't know how to listen, how to ask for consent.
Yeah. I love talking about how to hear a no. And actually, one of the lectures that was from the Sex Ed lecture series that I watched in preparation for this course had this beautiful activity, and it's filmed with students doing it, of students practicing thanking someone for telling them no, and they have to find their own words for how to do that feel authentic to them. Like, I'm glad you told me, or I appreciate you being honest with me, or whatever it is. So they have practiced someone saying no to them. They ask for a hug, someone says no, and then they find a way to graciously appreciate that. And I like immediately wrote on my to-do list, add this to my lessons, because I think about that all the time. And I do have a lot of no games with kids where they practice hearing it, but I've never incorporated that next step of practice appreciating it. I think that's a really cool lecture. I'm excited for people to watch that one.
I really think that we need to focus on both people and not just teach folks how to say yes or how to say no, but really thinking about it more as a conversation and more as something that we need to learn both sides of, right? Because we also often end up with this script where some people are being taught how to say no or yes, and other people just how to listen or not taught anything at all. And we really
Right.
want everyone to have all of those skills.
That's also what my undergraduate thesis was about the scripts of sexual initiator and sexual gatekeeper. And some people are taught push as far as you can, and the other person will let you know when you have to stop. And other people, and when I'm talking about people, I mean people socialized as men, and people socialized as women are taught like it's your job to put up your wall, like your job to figure out the moment and to push back and to keep them away and to be like sort of the moral in this like very traditional terrible understanding of sex is your job is to like keep him at bay until it's appropriate. And that still shows up all the time in the way that we play out consent.
Actually, I just attended a lecture last month, so it's probably not on your list. But one of the things that they were talking about is the concept of like an enthusiastic yes. And the interesting thing was it was research based, and the interesting thing was that when they asked people like how are you giving an enthusiastic yes, most people were not or were experiencing some like, well, I'm not sure if I want to do that, or maybe I want to try. And I think that's another interesting nuance about consent is that, sometimes we want to kind of make these broad brushstrokes like it has to be this, this, and this, or it's not consent. But the reality is that sometimes we don't know whether we want to do something until we try it, right? Or we think we might be interested, but we feel conflicted for a lot of different reasons. So there really is so much to consent. And I'm
Yeah,
really
you're
excited.
bringing up you're bringing up that E in fries, that controversial E in fries. I've seen a
Yes.
lot of replacement E words, and we actually at Yes use a replacement E word. So that's another thing we can talk all about the different models of consent that exist, what their strengths and their struggles are.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely seems like there's a lot of different opinions on the ways that it's appropriate to do this, and people have so many feelings. You bring up the tea video, and everybody has
Yeah,
very strong
totally.
feelings about that, and
Yeah.
other metaphors or being more direct. So I assume that's all things that we'll get into in the course. Let me ask you this. If someone is watching right now and they're thinking like, I think I want to take this, but I'm not sure, what would be what's a reason that you would encourage them to take the leap? What's the thing that you think will kind of push that person to say, "Oh yeah, this is what I want to do."
I think if you are really excited to have really complex and nuanced conversations about both consent as a concept and how to teach consent to people of all ages and the nuances of talking about it with people of different ages, like that's then you should take the class. Like if you're like, "Ooh, I want to get in there about consent and I don't want to just like use this model and leave it at that. Like I want to think through all the different ways and really get at like a better, exciting way to talk about and teach consent." Yeah, that's what we're gonna do, so
That sounds great. I think sometimes folks are afraid to criticize models about consent because we just want consent so much that we
yeah,
don't do that. And so I love that you're creating this safe space to say, well, maybe the E isn't enthusiastic, or,
yeah,
maybe this metaphor is just making things more confusing. So
yeah, and it's not about, like, being negative or tearing things down, like, it's great to have lots of options, and it's also just we need more like, we need more than an acronym, like, an acronym is a tool, so what's beyond that tool that we're using the tool to get towards, you know what I mean? Like, any acronym can only take us so far, so, yeah, how are we infusing this value into everything we do?
I love that. So is there anything else that you want to tell us about the program before we close out?
Just that it will be very interactive, very discussion based. It will not be mostly me lecturing. I will like expect everyone basically to be part of it because I know that everyone taking the class will have their own experiences with consent, with body autonomy, and with teaching those things. And I'm hoping to just facilitate all the knowledge in the room into a really rich discussion. So just so you know what to expect, you will be a key part of everything that happens.
Well, that sounds great. I just want to thank you, Izzy, for joining us, and for folks watching for joining. If you're interested in taking the program, you can go to sexedlectures.org and then click on the certificate programs, and you can find that. When does the program start, Izzy?
This whole class is in September, September 2nd to 25th on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Great. So again, go to sexedlectures.org and go to certificate programs to register, and we'll see you in September. Thanks again, everyone.
Can't wait.